Welcome to lesson number 10. This lesson is dedicated to articulating the bass, and basses come in two basic forms. One is acoustic, or the double bass that you've seen in symphony orchestras, lining the back right side of the orchestra. That's that really big looking violin there, okay, that you hold this way and you play. You can pluck that bass, you can use a bow, which is called arco. Lots of ways of articulating that instrument. You'll also see double basses, or the upright bass, or acoustic bass. It has three names. In jazz groups, I used to play in piano trios, which is piano, bass, drums, and sometimes we had singers or saxophone or trumpet lead. But I learned a lot from watching and listening to acoustic bass players. And when I joined other groups as a drummer, like pop, rock, contemporary, funk, R&B groups, I got a chance to listen to and watch electric bass players. And they're two completely different sounds, two completely different ways of articulating, and both very useful in a cappella groups when you are articulating some kind of a bass line that is connected usually to the drum part. So if you have a vocal percussionist, your bass line has to conform to what the percussionist is doing, and vice versa, because sometimes you start with a drum motif, sometimes you start with a bass line. As a drummer, I prefer waiting for the bass to come up with the initial motif, and then I devise my beat according to the rhythms that the bass player is playing. So the first articulation we're going to learn is the acoustic bass, or the upright bass articulation. And I'm not going to do arco, which is that type of thing. You'll hear Ella Fitzgerald doing that sometimes in her improvisations. But I'm going to talk about the pizzicato, or plucking of the string. This is the prevalent sound of the acoustic bass, at least the one that I like the most, and it has the most driving force when it comes to rhythm and keeping a beat and keeping a motif, keeping a groove moving along. So very typically the bass will be plucked with the fingers, and you move your other hand. There's no frets on it, but you move according to what string you want, what note you want. And the right hand, the other hand, if you're right-handed, plucks the string with one or two fingers, sometimes even three fingers. And the sound that emanates from that vocally is D-O-O-N, or doom. All right, it's a very resonant sound. It's the similar syllable to the kick drum, which is doom. But the kick drum is more of a kind of a dead sound, like doom, doom, doom. Whereas when you pluck the string of an acoustic bass, it's doom, 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 doom. Now again, I'm using vocal inflection, but I could also use pitches. Doom, 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 doom. Now with this kind of articulation, it's impossible to breathe and make that doom. It's not going to work, like vocal percussion. So the breaths have to be taken really quickly when you are doing what we call a walking bass line. And the reason it's called that is because it sounds like you're walking along like this. Doom, 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 doom. Notice I took that breath, doom, 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 doom. So you have to really breathe quickly when you are maintaining what we call an ostinato, which is a repeating bass line, or whether you're improvising, it doesn't matter. In the a cappella groups, circle song groups, there's usually some kind of an ostinato or a repeating line, just like the one I'm playing from a song called Killer Joe. Ding, 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 ding. All right, now a walking bass is also embellished with some extra syllables that are reminiscent of double and triple tonguing. And I review these syllables in my book, Rhythm Mania, which I wrote for singers so that they could articulate instravocally several instruments, in particular brass instruments, bass and drums, and of course scat singing. The first embellishment I wanted to take a look at is the added syllable of g, G-A, all right? Similar to double tonguing, which is da ga 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 da. If you use doon ga doon, you can get an embellishment And in this case, I'm in a triplet feel, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. The way I would use that ga is doon ga doon ga doon ga doon ga doon ga dun and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. So it's a beautiful upbeat articulation of that quarter note. Otherwise, you wouldn't know how that quarter note is divided. Because I could go doon, 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 and have 16ths. Doon, 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 if that was the feel of that beat. Or I could do eighth notes. Doon, 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 doon. So your embellishment has to fit into the beat subdivision or into that groove, all right? So if you're in triplets, doon, ga doon, ga doon, ga doon, ga 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and Now you don't do it after every beat because embellishments or ornaments are used sparingly and again force a coloration to add some rhythmic pulsation to the groove so that it just doesn't go ding, gong, ging. So listen to the difference with doon, ga doon, ga doon, ga doon, ga doon. If I use it just sometimes. Doon, 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 ga doon, doon, ga doon. All right, so what I'm doing now is embellishing that walking bass line. Plus, it also gives it some rhythmic power in that triplet subdivided idiom that we're working in now, which is jazz swing. You would also do that for reggae if it's with a triplet feel, or R&B, shuffle. Any of the triplets are going to be articulated that way. The only difference is the doon, ga doon, ga doon is more of an acoustic bass sound, where the electric, we'll get into a minute, electric is a little bit more percussive. If we take a look at the first page here, this is from Ted Reed's Syncopation for the Modern Drummer. It's page 11. There's a 20-bar exercise that practices the doon ga. Doon ga doon, 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 ga doon. All right, I'm going to do it with a swing feel. And just to give you a little bit of a feel for that, here's a medium blues. So you can hear what the bass is doing there and how this will sound eventually using the voice.
1, 2, 3.
Now in this case, the bass is doing what we call a 2-beat feel because it's doing mostly half notes. Doon, 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 doon. But you'll hear little embellishments as well. Now it's starting to walk. Doon, 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 doon. And you'll hear this doon, ga doon, doon, ga doon, ga doon, some little embellishments. All right. And you can also hear there a slide. Ding, 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 ding. All right, so some bass players will use more ornaments than others, all right. That's just the way it is. Some will keep it more simple. I'm going to practice this exercise now, show you how to practice it with a swing feel, this 20-bar exercise. And this puts the doonga doonga in different parts of the beat. All right, so a cappella, it'll sound like this. 1, 2, for 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Doonga doon 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 doonga doon doonga doon doon doonga 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 doon doonga doon doonga doonga doon doonga doonga doon 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 doonga doonga doon doonga 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 doon doon doonga doon doon doonga doon doonga doon 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 doonga doon doonga 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 doon doon doonka doon, doonka 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 doon, doonka doon, rest, rest, doonka doon doon, doonka doon doon, doonka doon doon, doonka doon, doonka doonka doon. No bass player is going to do doonka doonka doonka. It's not, there's too many of them in there. This is an exercise to practice that particular articulation. Here's what it will sound like when you're practicing to a medium blues.
1, 2.
Syllables only.
1, 2, 3.
Doonka doon 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 doonka doon doonka doon doon doonka 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 doon doonka doon doonka doonka doon doonka doonka doon 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 doonka doon ka doon doon ka doon ka doon ka doon ka doon ka doon 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 ka doon 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 ka doon doon ka doon 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 ka doon doon ka doon ka doon ka doon ka doon ka doon 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 ka doon doon ka doon ka doon ka doon doon ka doon rest rest doon ka doon 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 ka doon 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 ka doon 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 ka doon doon ka doon ka doon. All right. So again, that's the articulation of that bass, not using pitches. The pitches are a whole other story, and that depends on what the harmonic progression is, and we'll be getting into that starting with lesson 11. Now, besides the doon ga doon in swing, you can also go doon ga doon ga doon ga doon 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 ga doon ga doon ga doon doon doon. Now I'm using I'm using a very fast bossa nova, which is 1 and 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. You can count it either way. And I'm using doon ga doon ga doon ga doon 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 ga doon ga doon ga doon doon doon. So this would be kind of a double time bossa nova. Doon ga doon ga doon ga doon 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 ga doon ga doon ga doon 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 ga doon doon ga 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 doon. And you can see I'm varying the rhythm that way, but I'm basically going. So I'm doing the root and the fifth of the chord, then I'm switching chord, root, fifth, root. So roots and fifths are a good way to start doing bass lines in. All right. So now I'm going to move back to the triplet feel, and we're going to work on the triplet digga-ba, which is another great way of doing any triplet feel. I like using it in medium swing feels or even fast swing. I'll show you how it works in both. All right, so on page 15 in the Ted Reed book, there's a 16-bar exercise, which is a culmination of a whole bunch of exercises that preempt that work on particular patterns repeated 4 times. So this one is kind of like an etude for in this case, not vocal percussion, but vocal bass, instravocal bass articulations, using doon, 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 using doon for the quarters. And for triplets, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a digga-ba, 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 digga-ba. Now, that triplet in swing can be accented on the downbeat or the upbeat. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4, or 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. Remember I told you before that hard swinging means more accenting on the upbeat. So I tend to do my triplets with an accent on the last beat. Digga-ba-doon, doon, doon, ga-doon, ga-digga-ba-doon, doon. And you can mix the two, doon, ga-doon, and digga-ba-doon. All those can be mixed as you desire. Here's what it sounds like a cappella. Page 15, 16-bar exercise. A 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Doon, 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 digga-ba-doon, doon, digga-ba-doon, digga-ba, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, doon, digga-ba-doon, digga-ba, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, doon, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, digga-ba-doon, doon, digga-ba-doon, doon, 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 digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, 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 digga-ba, 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 digga-ba-doon, digga-ba, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, doon, digga-ba, 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 digga-ba-doon, doon, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon. Now I'm going to play it with the music, and you'll see how nicely those syllables correspond to this feel.
A 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3.
Doon, 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 digga-ba-doon, doon, digga-ba-doon, digga-ba, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, doon, digga-ba-doon, digga-ba, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, doon, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, digga-ba-doon, doon, digga-ba-doon, doon, 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 digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, 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 digga-ba, 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 digga-ba-doon, digga-ba, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon, doon, digga-ba, 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 digga-ba-doon, doon, digga-ba, digga-ba-doon. And there you go. So it's important not to rush that triplet, and this is very important for bass players and for instravocal bass singers. Digga-ba, 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 digga-ba. No matter how fast it goes, you do not want to rush that triplet, because then it'll sound like digga-ba, 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 doon, digga-ba, doon. It's got to be very smooth and evenly subdivided, which is why drumming is such a great thing, even body drumming, tapping like digga-ba, 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 and realizing that rhythm in your body in different ways is really important. Let's up the tempo a little bit to a brighter blues, and I'll show you that this works just as well.
A 1, 2, a 1,
16
2,
bar.
3.
Doom 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 digga ba doom doom digga ba doom digga ba digga ba digga ba doom doom digga ba doom digga ba digga ba digga ba doom digga ba digga ba doom doom digga ba digga ba doom digga ba digga ba doom digga ba doom doom digga ba doom 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 digga ba doom digga ba doom digga ba doom digga ba digga ba digga ba doom digga ba digga ba doom doom digga ba digga ba doom doom digga ba doom. All right. So that takes a little bit of practice. But again, these ornaments are not used that much. This is an exercise to practice enunciating those syllables over and over again so that you get some muscle memory. When you're actually doing this, ga-doom, ga-doom, ding, 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 digga-ba-doom, doom, ga-doom, doom, doom, ga-doom, doom, doom, ga-digga-ba-doom, doom, ga-doom, doom. Now you can also do doom, ga-digga-ba, which is a larger, more sophisticated ornamentation, and that works really well. Doon ga digga ba doon, ga digga ba doon, ga digga ba doon. So I'm putting the doon ga and then digga ba. Doon ga digga ba doon, ga digga ba doon, ba digga ba doon, ga digga ba digga ba digga ba digga ba doon. All right. So those two work very nicely together. Also on there's a 16-bar exercise you can practice on page 17. That uses the doon ga doon ga doon ga digga ba doon ga doon ga doon. This is not an easy thing to practice, but it will give you some muscle memory, and I'm going to review that for you. It's page 17. It's a 16-bar exercise in the Ted Reed syncopation book. I'll do it with the medium blues, so you can hear each articulation.
1, 2, 3.
Doom ga doom ga doom ga digga ba doom ga doom ga digga ba doom ga digga ba digga ba digga ba doom ga doom ga digga ba doom digga ba digga ba digga ba doom ga digga ba digga ba doom ga doom ga digga ba digga ba doom ga digga ba digga ba doom ga digga ba doom ga doom ga digga ba doom ga doom ga doom ga doom ga digga ba doom ga digga ba doom ga digga ba doom ga digga ba digga ba digga ba digga ba doom ga digga ba digga ba digga ba doom ga doom ga digga ba digga ba digga ba digga ba doom ga doom ga digga ba digga ba doom. Woo! And that's even a struggle for me because there's no place to breathe. You can't. There's no syllable digga without sounding awful. So intravocal bass singing not so easy, and you just have to leave spaces or grab a breath in between a rhythm if you can, as quickly as you can. We come now to electric bass, which is the one you hold sideways like a guitar, all right? One hand, if you're right-handed, is going to be doing the plucking and the slapping and whatever articulations you're doing. The other hand is going to control the frets. Some electric basses do not have frets, all right? Which allows a little more clarity when you're doing boo, doo, doo, woo, when you're sliding on strings. But I'm going to talk briefly about the slap bass, which is like a plucking effect, bick, 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 kind of like double tonguing, which is taka, 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 ta. In electric bass, I use bicka, bicka, bick, B-I, a B sound, and a bick with a K. Bicka, 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 bick. This also goes into bing, which is my quarter note. So for quarter notes, I'm using an attack. Instead of doom, which is a nice, more melodic attack, bing is more percussive, all right? So in the electric bass attack of quarter notes, and we're going to go back to this exercise I did before, bing, if I'm doing two, bicka, and if I put that together, bing, bicka, bing, bicka, bing, bicka, bing, bicka, bing, bicka, bing, and that's like double tonguing. Dam, daka da, daka da, daka da, daka da, daka bing, bicka bing, or doon, dooka doon, doonka doon, doonka doon. Now notice doonka doon works much better in swing. Bing, ka bing doesn't work so well with swing. So I reserve all my jazz swing to acoustic bass and all my R&B, funk, and pop and rock and contemporary grooves to the electric. Bing, bicka bing, bicka bing, bicka bing, bick. Now, for triple tonguing, I taught you da da ga da da ga da da ga or da ga da da ga da using D's and G's. In acoustic bass, it was digga ba digga ba digga, which is more legato and more typical of the acoustic bass. In electric, it's more like picketa, 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 picketa. Even the ta is okay. So if you're going boom, bick, ding, bick, ding, bick, ding, bick, boom, bick, boom, bick, boom, bick, bing, bick, bing, bick, bing. It's the same ornamentations. It's just articulated with more percussivity. So if I practice this 20-bar exercise on page 11, this is the first one we did, I believe, it's going to sound like this. Remember using bicka for the eighth notes and bing for the quarters. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Bicka bing 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 bicka bing bing bicka 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 bing bicka bing bicka bicka bing bicka bicka bing 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 bicka bicka bing bicka 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 bing bing bicka bing bing bicka bing bicka bing 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 bicka bing bicka 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 bing bing bicka bing bicka 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 bing bicka bing bicka bing bing bicka bing bing bicka bing bing bicka bing bicka bicka bing. Now, to give you a more clear idea what that electric slap sounds like, there's an artist whose name is Bob Mincer. He's a famous saxophone player. He's another great resource for sing-along records, or CDs, sorry, I just dated myself. Sing-along CDs where you can improvise over chord changes. And this is a little bit of a song he uses called Slammin', and we're going to use this for melodic scat singing coming up in one of the later lessons.
Number 6, Slammin'.
Ding, bicky, ding, bick. Ding, bicky, ding, bick. All right. This is a great groove. I love Bob Mincer's music because it's to me, the rhythm section is just perfect. And in this case, the title befits the rhythm section perfectly, Slammin', because that's a slammin' rhythm section he's got. And you'll hear the drums perfectly in sync with the bass. All right, so if I'm practicing this to music, I'll put this back to the beginning and I'll do this same exercise.
Number 6.
This is a 20 bar on page 11. Pick a bing 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 pick a bing pick a bing bing pick a pick a pick a pick a bing pick a bing pick a pick a bing pick a pick a bing 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 pick a pick a bing pick a pick a pick a pick a pick a bing bing pick a bing bing pick a bing pick a bing 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 pick a bing pick a pick a pick a pick a pick a bing bing pick a bing pick a pick a pick a bing pick a bing pick a bing bing pick a bing bing pick a bing bing pick a bing pick a pick a bing. There you go. All right. I used to work with a bass player, Wayne Pedswater, who's unfortunately has passed away. And he was a friend of mine when I went to Berklee College of Music, and he had the fastest slap at that time. This was in the mid-'70s. He would do with just his thumb. Bing, bick it, bing, bick it, bing, bick it, bick it, bing, bick, bing, bick it, bing, bick it, bick it, bick it, bing, 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 bick it, bick it, bing. That's like incredible. So, and he went on to join Buddy Rich and then played with Paul Simon and Steve Gadd, and a great history. Blood, Sweat, and Tears, amazing. Very, very young, very talented guy. But I learned a lot about electric bass playing, articulation as it applied really to my double and triple tonguing. You know, all I did was change the syllables, but use the same approach. All right, so if you're practicing triplets, we jump now to that exercise we did before. It's a 16-bar exercise on page 15, which has the triplet. Pick it up, 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 pick it up. Not so easy to do, so I'm just going to do this a cappella. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Bing, 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 pick it to bing, bing, pick it to bing, pick it to pick it to pick it to bing, bing, pick it to bing, pick it to pick it to pick it to bing, pick it to pick it to bing, bing, pick it to pick it to bing, pick it to bing, bing, pick it to bing, bing, pick it to bing, 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 pick it to pick it to bing, pick it to bing, pick it to bing, pick it to pick it to pick it to pick it to bing, pick it to pick it to pick it to bing, bing, pick it to pick it to pick it to bing, bing, pick it to pick it to pick it to bing. Woo! All right, so I may have done some variations there, but you get the idea. So that concludes, let's say, pick it to ping, I wouldn't do the triplet and the eighth. So That concludes lesson number 10. So go home and practice.